So you guys have already been working on a wireframe and a storyboard, and so you should have a pretty good idea of what you want your website to look like and how you want it to be arranged. Hot. So at this point, the next thing is really to create the visuals of what it should look like. And so at this point, you create a mock-up. And a mock-up is the closest thing you get to the actual website, the actual look of the website, and the content of it without actually creating it. So this is normally done in Photoshop, although some people prefer to do it in Fireworks, but we're going to use Photoshop. You also have, following the mock-up, you also have a prototype, which sometimes you do in web design, sometimes you don't. It depends on sort of what your end product is, how much work is involved, and what exactly the product is. If it's just a simple website, you normally don't need to do a prototype as well because it's normally just going to be HTML and CSS anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new document. We're going to switch this to pixels. And let's see, let's check what the common screen size is right now. So most common screen resolution. So it's important that you're designing websites that most people can see. So let's see what this says. I'm not a big fan of W3 schools, but they have pretty recent data. So 34% is higher than this, but most people it's around here, 1366 by 768. I'm going to go ahead and go with 1280 by 1024. So 1280 by 1024. This doesn't really matter because we're working in pixels. Let's go ahead and just double check another link just in case. Let's take a look at this. So this talks about that too, and that's all the way back from 2012. So we could move to this. You could move to this if you want to for yours. I'm going to stick with the 1024 by 768 because, as we saw, there were still a fair number of people who haven't moved forward. So I think I'm going to do 1024 by 768 inside of 1280 by 1024. So 1024 768. Okay, go ahead and drop that down. And 1024 by 768. And this just helps make sure that almost everybody except for 1% will be able to view my website the way that I intend it. So that's a pretty good percentage. Alright, so we've got to here, and I'm going to go ahead and just change the color so it's not white. I'm going to use my paint bucket and paint it. And now I'm going to grab this marquee tool, which creates a selection. I'm going to copy it with Command C. You can also find it up here in Edit. And I'm going to paste it on top of this. So I have my design size inside of the most common resolution size. Well, not even the most common resolution size anymore, but yeah, so I can kind of get an idea of how it lays out in more common resolutions and even a little bit bigger. But I'm going to try to design within this space here. I made the page size 1024 by 768, right? And granted, the page goes down, so I could make this much longer, but in newspapers, you often talk about designing for above the fold, and that's what the people first see when your newspaper is on the stack, before they pick it up, when they're thinking about picking it up. And so you want something that's going to keep their attention and get them to look at it, get them to pick it up, get them to read it. And it's the same thing with the internet. This is the first thing that people are going to see, assuming they're at this low resolution size. So I want to make sure that my design looks nice and interesting at this size, as well as at the larger size too, because depending on how big their screen is going to vary how much they see. And if you've got 20 or so % of the people who don't see anything interesting on this first screen, they're just going to leave. So yeah, so I have that set up. I'm going to use multiple layers. So layers are nice because they're pixels stacked on top of each other. And the more layers you have, the more stacks of those pixels you sort of have. And the reason that matters is Photoshop is pixel based. So like if I have this layer and I draw on it, let's increase my opacity so you can actually see that. These pixels, the pixels that were behind there, are gone. And this is considered destructive editing because you have destroyed what was there. You have changed it. And it's permanent unless you use your history to undo it or go back. The nice thing about layers is if you build on layers, if I did that on a layer instead, the pixels are not gone anymore. They are just behind what I made. So I can always remove the layer, hide the layer, change the layer without destroying what was behind it. So what was I going to make? I don't remember. Let's go back and look at my ideas. So here was my idea. This is how I want my page to look. And I sort of designed it already to be sort of that above the fold idea. Go ahead and hide the history window. And there we go. So this is what I want it to look like above the fold up here. So very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a space for that banner, kind of here-ish. And actually what I'm going to do before even that, I'm going to, as you saw, like it's a little bit hard to be exactly in the right spots, and you don't want parts of the page to be bigger than the other. So I'm actually going to open up my rulers, which is under View, and now I can drag out some guidelines to help me. So I'm going to drag a guideline there, and they should snap, and I'm going to drag a guideline there, and it should snap. And now, when I make a new layer, when I start using my selection tool, it should snap where these rulers are. So you can see it snaps. So this is going to be sort of my top part here. And on this layer, I'm going to do what? So what do I want it to do? I think I'm going to have a nice gentle fade from sort of a soft blue to kind of a little bit of a deeper blue. Now something else to think about is your color palette. So what colors do you want to use? So generally speaking, you don't want to use all the colors of the rainbow. You don't want to design with all the colors of the wind. You want to limit your color palette. You want there to be a certain motif, a certain color motif. So you want to choose a couple of colors. So for my design, I've been kind of playing with sort of blues, obviously, since that's what I've been using here. But I'm kind of in between. Do I want to go with yellows to go with the blues, or do I want to go with oranges? And I'm thinking about maybe a yellow-orange, but I'll probably try both and see what happens. So I want to make sort of a fade here. Ooh, that's too strong. So I switched this from the bucket to the gradient, and it's going from one color to the other. You can create other gradients up here. You can create your own custom gradients. Actually, if you want more colors, you can just double-click on this, and you can add additional colors to this. So I could add an additional color here, and I can double-click it and choose a different color. And you can start to get some interesting things if that's what you want to do, but I would not recommend that. So I'm going to pull that out and bring that over here. And yeah, maybe something kind of more like that. So we get kind of a nice soft fade. And I'm going to click, and I'm going to hold down to drag in the direction I want. If I hold Shift, it will lock it onto 90 degrees or 45 degrees. So now I can make sure that my gradient is straight up and down and not slightly off to a side, or even just slightly off. You know, it's noticeable. So a nice soft gradient. So that's going to be my spot for my banner. And then I need to have a menu, so I'm going to make a new layer here. And let's make this, let's go ahead and drag this down. So I'll make another guide sort of at the edge of this. Is it snapping? I can't tell. No, it's not snapping. So let's switch layers. Now that I have this layer on, maybe it will snap. Yeah, there we go. So if you want it to snap, make sure you have a layer that actually has paint on it, on the border where you want it to snap to. I'll zoom back out. I'll zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to create a menu here on the left side. So from my storyboard, which I did on the computer so I don't have it handy, but I didn't have that many links. So I'm not going to make that huge of a menu, but something sort of like that. I want to sort of play with the width a little bit, so maybe around there. That looks pretty decent to me. And so I'm on this new layer here, and I'm going to actually, I think, fill it with this color. So right now I have, I'm going to sort of set up some little color palettes down here so that way I have sort of the colors that I'm using. So I'm going to hold shift to make a perfect square, just because it's going to bother me if it's not. So I've got that color that I'm using. And let's make another perfect square. Actually, I'm going to use more rulers because it's going to bother me once again if it's not perfect. And you often see these on mockups. You often see sort of little boxes of exactly which colors the designer is using. So that way the company, the client, sort of has, like, you know, knows exactly which colors, and, you know, if there's one that they don't like, then they can say, hey, try, you know, this is a little too purpley, or this is a little too blue, or whatever, and they can ask them to change it. So I'm going to go with 5 colors total. I think that's a fair number. So I've got sort of 2 lavenderish colors, a blue, and I'm going to go with sort of 2 yellow orangey colors. So maybe sort of a, I think I like that color. Although it might change as I finish my mock-up, it might change altogether. And then I want one that's a little bit more orange and a little less yellow. Well, maybe a little more yellow than that. Kinda like that, and a little bit more saturated. So that's going to be sort of my color palette there. I've got sort of a split complement going on. If you were to put these on the color wheel, orange and blue are across from each other, and I've got a little bit of yellow and purple going on too, so it's sort of a pairing of complements. I don't quite like this bouncing right up to that, so I think I'm going to bring that down a couple notches, maybe there. I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer, and now I want sort of this content section here. And I want this to line up perfectly, so I'm going to drag another grid, but it helps if you're on the right layer. There we go. And this is my empty layer, yes it is. And let's go with more of this. I don't really quite like how much purple there is, but I'm not sure what to do with that yet. That's pretty decent, but it's actually pretty small for content. I'm a little concerned about how little content space there is, so I think I'm going to increase the size of this to about there. And decrease the size of this one, so I'm switching layers, adding a little bit of margin space. I think that's decent, but I want them to feel about the same. I think that feels a little better. This is all really an art, and so, you know, nothing is absolute, nothing is perfect. You kind of have to decide what you like.